So we're made it over to lecture number 7. This is the Introduction to Superheat, a long mysterious component or diagnostic tool that if you're new to the industry, it's going to be could be a challenge to absorb the concept. If you've been in the industry for a while, I can't emphasize enough to have a solid understanding of superheat. All right, so we're going to dive right into it here. So this should be familiar to you. We covered this in lecture number 6. This is a basic refrigeration system. You've got your evaporator, compressor, condenser, expansion valve. When we refer to superheat, we're always going to be referring to the evaporator or the heat absorption side of a refrigeration system. So you always will know that. That never changes. So what is it? What exactly is superheat? Well, what it is, it's the additional heat added to the refrigerant after it's been transitioned from a liquid to a gas state. So let's dig into this just a little bit. All right. So as your refrigerant leaves your expansion valve, remember it goes in at a high pressure what? High pressure liquid, right? So it goes in, it comes out as a low pressure liquid. So very similar, as I mentioned before, to putting your finger over the top of a hose, you're creating a pressure drop. And the characteristic of refrigerant, when you create a pressure drop, it's going to start to absorb heat. I gave you an example of one of those cleaning dust off things that we use on our computers. When you press the button on that, and if you can feel that can getting cold, well, what you're doing is you're creating it's an evaporator effect. That refrigerant, the propellant inside, is boiling off, getting cold, right? So it's the same kind of a concept. So as that refrigerant goes into your evaporator and you're blowing this warm air across it, it's starting to boil. It's starting to absorb heat. And what superheat is, and we're going to cover this in the next slide again, but what superheat's telling you is at what point in this evaporator has the low pressure liquid completely transformed into a low pressure gas. So in most evaporator systems, that's going to occur right around here. So what superheat is as that refrigerant is completing its journey through the evaporator, it's picking up additional heat. And knowing exactly where that occurs is a very valuable piece of information to a diagnostic technician. All right, and some of the features of it, or some of the benefits, is you're going to understand the performance of your evaporator here. You're going to know how much of your evaporator you're actually using, and it'll also help you really determine, let's say for example you happen to have your expansion valve is misbehaving here. We're going to cover this in the next slide here. If your expansion valve is not putting in enough refrigerant in here, you're gonna reach your boil off state way up here, right? So that's going to equate to elevated superheat because you're still continuing to absorb heat. Granted, not as much, but you're going to be able to see what's going on in your evaporator. And in the real world out there, these are copper tubes. You can't see inside and actually see what's going on here. All right. So in the next slide, we're going to be talking about. We'll take a really close-up look at what's happening in the evaporator and the expansion device.